Okay, let's get started. As always, as I go through this today, just feel free to pop in a question at any time as I go through this. I always like making these a dialogue instead of a monologue. It helps me kind of get through the presentation a little better if it's kind of a give and take as we go, based on limitations of me just talking to the screen and not necessarily being able to hear or see you guys. But it always helps me if you'll pop questions in as we go through this. Also, just up front, this presentation is going to be a little bit different than presentations in the past in that it's a little more of a conceptual nature. It's not so much hard facts of, I'll be teaching a few things, but it won't be just these are lessons to be learned. These are more kind of concepts you can look at, because in the end, everything we'll talk about today is all situational based on your data. So we're going to kind of take a deep dive into some metadata on my pictures and show you what it reveals to me and how I interpret it. And so in turn, the hope is you can kind of learn from the way I look at my data and be able to kind of do the same thing with your images later on. So again, because it's a little bit conceptual, if I get through this and you don't quite understand what I'm talking about or what I'm trying to say, just let me know. But hey, welcome to today's webinar, Mining Your Metadata. Subtitled it, What Your Built-in Photo Data Can Teach You. And again, I'm Russell Graves coming to you from Dodge City, Texas. The last few times I came to you, I was talking about how hot it was here in my part of Texas, but luckily that's all changed. It's not by any stretch of the imagination's cold, but the mornings are definitely starting to get cooler. And when it does peak for the afternoon highs, the peak is really short-lived. It gets, I think yesterday our high was 87, and it was about 87 for 30 minutes, and then it started going back down. So the weather's starting to get nice. Fall's right around the corner here, and you can already start to see a little bit of the change in some of the trees around here. So welcome to my part of the world, and hopefully as we go through this. Oh, by the way, I added some new pictures to this presentation. These are all some of the latest pictures I took. I took that one yesterday. I guess this is the old guy coming out in me, because I know my parents, they're in their 80s. They love their hummingbirds. And so I decided to put a hummingbird feeder up at my place and check them out. And they're so much fun to watch. And that was a ruby-throated hummingbird, a female ruby-throated hummingbird I shot yesterday. And those things are pretty fascinating to watch. So I'm really looking forward, based on, I think, the last webinar I did on photo hacks. I'm looking forward to trying to figure out different ways to take pictures of the hummingbirds other than just a typical way that you see it, hummingbird pictures taken. But such a fascinating little bird. They're like little fighter jets. And to be as small as they are, I can't believe they're as cantankerous as they are to one another, as they're constantly fighting and jockeying and competing for 4 spots on the hummingbird feeder. So it's, again, they're just a lot of fun to watch. And so the first question you may ask, a lot of you guys probably know, but I feel like I don't need to take for granted that everybody knows what the metadata is. And here's the definition I found yesterday. Photo metadata is a set of data describing and providing information about rights and administrations of an image. It allows information to be transported with an image file in a way that can be understood by other software and human users. And when digital photography first came out, and then I realized that all the settings that you had, and it doesn't, it says in the description here, it's about describing and providing information about rights and administration. It also provides all the technical data in your pictures as well. When digital photography first came out, I was pretty excited about the prospects of being able to take a picture and then look back at that data and see how I arrived at that picture. There was a time early on in my photography career, because to remind you, I started taking pictures for magazines back when I was 19 years old, and 51 now. So I've been doing it for a long time. But back in the early days of film, really all I shot was, or back the first, I guess, third of the time I took pictures, about the first 10 or 12 years I shot pictures, is all on film. And so you shot film, and unless you kept a real meticulous notebook about how you made a picture, I had guesses, but you never really knew for sure. Well, with metadata being embedded into the pictures now, every picture I take, I know exactly the recipe that it takes to make that picture again. And it's been really, really valuable in helping teach me photography along the way. because what it did was I went from being primarily just a wildlife and nature photographer, which was what led me into photography, my love of wildlife and nature. It led me from there till I started figuring out other genres of photography, primarily kind of lifestyle photography. And so it allowed me to really transform my business and shift my business away from just doing wildlife and nature to also including kind of the people element into wildlife and nature. And so in the ensuing years, I've ended up shooting a lot of ad campaigns and a lot of magazine stories and a lot of professional work for stuff that's kind of not, I call it rural lifestyles, not necessarily wildlife and nature, but really things you can do in the rural areas, from farming and ranching to hunting and fishing and any kind of outdoor activities. I do a lot of that stuff now. And so, in fact, I was supposed to be shooting a magazine shoot today or yesterday and then finish up this morning and be at this presentation, but that thing got canceled. So I still do a lot of work like that. And it's all because of me mining and analyzing the metadata in my pictures is what allowed me to do that. And so going on to this next slide, you can see here, this is just a snippet that a snippet I took out of Lightroom. And if you look over in the library pane over on the right hand side, you can see there's a metadata panel towards the bottom of all that information. And right there, you can see all the information it gives you about every single picture you take. I'll go to the next one where it's a little closer. You can see it better here. I've got a copyright preset that I put in mine when I download the pictures. In other words, it puts the copyright status in the image and who's the creator and all that. So as we go down, it's got my file name. It's got the original file name, preserved file name. That's what the camera called it. Always, if you've listened to any of my presentations about image management, I always change the name of my pictures to something more proprietary with my name in it. And that way it gives them some portability beyond. So the reason why I changed the name on it is because if a magazine has a picture and then they're not adept at looking into the metadata to see who owns the pictures, by looking at the file name, they can figure out pretty quick whose picture that belongs to. So that's why I always incorporate my name into the image, into the final file name. The number is just a sequential number, means absolutely nothing. But going down, you can also see the folder that this picture lives in that I showed you. The young man in the picture is my son. Metadata status has been changed. So I changed something along in the lines in there, probably on the file name is what I ended up changing. And then the label is some stuff, is the color label I gave it in Lightroom. But then here's where it gets to the interesting information. My nose is itching. You can see I captured that picture at 6:03 and 38 seconds PM on May 22nd, 2020. It's got the dimensions of the image. It's got the crop dimensions of the image. And so that picture I took is not cropped. It's got the exposure. You can see there I shot that picture at 1/8,000th of a second at f1.4. And then the focal length of 85 millimeters, which that's an 85 millimeter f1.2 lens you can see on the bottom. ISO 200, flash, it did not fire. The make of the camera was Canon, and the model was a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. So every picture you take, it preserves all of that information in it. No matter, I haven't found one digital camera that doesn't preserve that information in it. Even the GoPro I use quite a bit still preserves that information in it. And that information can be valuable. Number one, I won't dive too deep into this, but number one of the ways it's most valuable is if you use Lightroom or some other kind of image management software, you're able to search for pictures using that metadata. So I can go through and I can say, okay, Lightroom, show me all the pictures I've ever taken that I shot with that 85 millimeter lens. Or I can say, all right, Lightroom, show me all the pictures I took in May of 2020. Or I can say, show me all the pictures I just took in May of any year. Or show me the pictures I just took at 6 o'clock of any year. So there's a, I'm not this good at math. There's not an infinite way you can search for your pictures using metadata and Lightroom, but there's a finite way, but there's just a myriad of ways that you can comb through the data. I'm not that good a mathematician to tell you how many different ways you can look for your images, but really the metadata in Lightroom, that's one of the things people skip over quite a bit is, you know, when I do photo tours, if we have a chance to do some in-class stuff, one of the things I always try to share with people are the image management parts of Lightroom, because I feel like the color correction and the exposure and the saturation and all that stuff gets beat to death. And, you know, a lot of people know how to use it. It's important. I don't mean to say that it's not, but a lot of people know how to use that stuff. But I feel like the image management part is probably one of the stronger pieces of Lightroom. And I'll be doing a webinar about that in more of an in-depth detail about how to use metadata to search for your images and how to just organize your images so you can find them. The best testament I know to use on image organization and image management is, I'm not saying this as an insult to my wife at all, but my wife really doesn't keep up with what I do. She knows I go out and take pictures and she likes what I do, but she's not really involved in the nuts and bolts of how pictures get filed or anything like that. But using the metadata and using just a basic filing system and Lightroom, I can, if I'm somewhere else and I need to find an image, I can call her and within 5 minutes she can find the image I'm looking for. And that's out of a huge catalog of images. And I'll share that a little bit with you more in a minute. So before I go any further, does anybody have any questions about metadata to this point? Understand what it is, don't understand what it is, but you can see, because you to double down on this point, because it captures all that data in each image, and you're able to mine that data later on and be able to manipulate it and use it and view different pictures by looking at that data. It's just it's pretty powerful. But going one step further, I'm going to show you some ways that I analyze that data to help educate me as a photographer. And hopefully I'll give you some action items that you can use to maybe analyze your data and help start kind of making sense out of, you know, photography kind of seems like a random act, but over time, it's not necessarily that random at all. You start seeing some patterns emerge, and we're going to view some of those patterns using Lightroom. So I'm looking down. Mary asked, does Photoshop have the same searching and filing facility as Lightroom? It does not actually. So the original iteration in the Adobe catalog, and I may be off a little bit on this, but I'm pretty close. So Photoshop's an old program, and it's kind of just made for searching one image at a time, or working on one image at a time. And so one of the pieces that came out to assist in the image management is a software program called Adobe Bridge. Now, Adobe Bridge will do a lot of the things we're talking about right now, as far as being able to look through metadata and organize your images. And then so after Photoshop came out, then Adobe Bridge came out, the people at Adobe, I can't imagine this is not what motivated them. Someone eventually probably said, hey, we should put both of these together in the same program, an ability to manage your images and analyze them, or be able to search using metadata and be able to keep up with your pictures, the image management part, and combine it with some of the photo editing stuff that Lightroom, that Photoshop has. So that's how Lightroom was born. I've been using Lightroom ever since it came out, since version 1. So I'm a long-time user of that software program. But before I did that, I managed all of my images and kept up with where they're at using Adobe Photoshop Bridge. So yeah, Photoshop itself won't do it, but the software, if you combine it with the software program Bridge, it will do it. But Lightroom gives you a convenient way to kind of do it all in one software program. I hope that answers your question. I don't see any other questions coming through, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Some more recent images. My little sunflower patch here on Hackberry Farm in the upper right, and the lower right is one of the pictures I took on that Alaska Bears Uncharted Bears trip we did back in July. And then the wrestling bears, that was actually at Katmai. I was there, I guess I got there, well, close to 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago I was there. So there's one of the pictures we shot on that trip. So here's the big number right here. To do this analysis we're going to look at today, I analyzed 620,937 pictures that exist in my files right now. And so I did a deep dive. I used a a software program. You might look this one up, called Photostatistica. And what Photostatistica does is allows you to mine and group the data that it mines from your images. I believe that Photostatistica is a Mac only software program, but I think there's another. I don't know the name of it. I should have looked it up, but I think there's a complimentary version that will work for PC as well. But using that software, I just analyzed all the pictures and then started looking at it in graphical form and started trying to figure out what's this data trying to teach me. Some of the things I learned are things I expected. Some of the things I learned are things that I didn't expect. Some of the things I learned, it just kind of reinforces what I sort of already knew, but I never knew it in necessarily an empirical way. I just knew it because I've been doing it so much. I just kind of figured that's the way it goes for me. And I'll share my insights on each one of these. Now, one of the things you got to think about when you do this, I'm not trying to defend a doctoral thesis when I look at this. So some of the ways that look at these numbers, there's a lot of different ways to manipulate these statistics. I just did everything in one single group and kind of pulled some generalities from that. And it's also really, really, really skewed towards the style of shooting I do. And I'll share that more with you as I go through this. Just another pretty picture. That's from here on the farm in Dodge City, Texas. Here's the first piece of data that I pulled out, and this is the camera used. Now, this doesn't tell me necessarily any insight that's going to help me as a photographer. But what it is interesting to see is I've got a choice of 4 or 5 different cameras I can pick up at any given time. I'll tell you the roster here in a minute that I still have. It really resonates on what camera I use the most. Like this Canon 1D X Mark II. That wasn't my camera. It was one that I borrowed a while back, and so I took 2% of the images of that. This Olympus E M1X, same way. It's just a picture that camera Olympus sent me to try out. I tried it out, but shot a lot of pictures with it because if you do the math on, let me see here, 620,000 images and 2% of that's still 12,400 images that I took with that camera. And then Canon EOS 60D, 3%, 40D, 7%. So the first 3 cameras I don't even have anymore. The 60D I got rid of. The 40D broke last year, so I don't use it anymore. But that 40D is what I used. If you watch my webinar on using camera traps, or my webinar on photo hacks, and I talked about using camera traps, that was primarily my camera trap camera right there. And so I can look at that and know a lot of the pictures I took out of that were just not usable because they were weeds blowing or buzzards flying into the frame or whatever else. And so it goes down to the 4 most used cameras I had. And there we have a 1D Mark II-N, which I don't have that camera anymore. And so the 3 cameras I have of the 4 that I have primarily, the 1D Mark III that I still use, and my son uses that some, the 5D Mark II, 26%, and then the 1D Mark IV, I use 27% of the time. So almost 3/4 of the pictures I've taken in this group were taken with 3 different cameras. And these are older cameras, as you can see, but you know, one of the things I'm constantly a preacher of, even old cameras still make good pictures, particularly if you use proper photographic technique. Oh, I went too far. Let me go back. Particularly if you use proper photographic technique. So as you can see here, there's nothing I don't use fancy cameras. That 1D Mark IV is probably that's the newest camera I have, and I think it's probably a 5 or 6 year old body. I buy cameras to use, and so since I buy them to use and I put them through rough situations, I'll typically buy used cameras and just, you know, if they break, I'm not out that much. But with that said, and the new Canon R3 that just came out today, I might be buying a new camera really soon. But the one thing that's curious to me as I look at this list, I've got a new camera that I've hardly used, I found out. And I didn't realize this. I've used it so little it doesn't even register. I bought a Canon 90D camera last year, and turns out this is one thing it taught me. I've hardly even used that camera. And so I've got to put it to use more, and I did yesterday, and that's when I took that hummingbird picture, was with that camera. And then this kind of surprises me too, you know, because as I look at this, the focal length chart, it surprises me in a way, but in another way, it doesn't surprise me. Now, before I get too far into it, you can see 16% over on the right-hand side of the screen. 16% of the pictures I've taken were miscellaneous. Because of the way this thing analyzes the data, if you're using a zoom lens, it might have recorded the fact that you shot something at 18 millimeters or 127 millimeters if you're shooting a 70 to 200. So I combined, and when I looked at this data, I combined all those irregular numbers and just kind of focused on the common numbers you see in lenses. So here's what I learned ultimately, which this is what surprised me when I looked at this, and my takeaway to come. So 19 and 3 is 22, plus 6 is 28, plus 2 is 30, plus 24 is 54%, plus 2% is 56%. 56% of the images I've taken are considered to be a telephoto. Now that makes sense to me since I shoot a lot of wildlife, and also a lot of the people pictures that I do, I'll shoot either with a 50 millimeter lens or an 85 millimeter lens. But what I really suspected, though, because I shoot a fair amount of landscapes too. I mean, I don't think technically people think of me as a landscape photographer, but I take a lot of landscape pictures, and it surprised me of how relatively small amount of wide angle pictures I've taken. So one of the things that this has inspired me to do is really try to grow that number to the left of 50 millimeters. You know, so that's 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13%. And undoubtedly, some of the ones in the 16% miscellaneous are part of this, but you know, that's a pretty small percentage based on overall of how I take pictures. Oops. Follow-up response here from earlier on the talk about Bridge. It says Stanley tells us that Adobe Bridge is standalone and free to all now, so that's good to know. Stanley, thanks for sharing that. And this is so looking at my ISO is something else that I learned. You know, and this is looking at this chart. The fact is, this is a little bit of me being a dinosaur and not necessarily wanting to change, because it all goes back to what I always preach. Good sound fundamental techniques can keep pace with technology, because you got to remember there are a lot of good pictures being made when people were just shooting on film cameras at ISO 64 or ISO 100. And so there's not, so I've never felt an inherent need to shoot at really high ISOs. And so one of the things that I always told people, and I didn't have any data to prove it until I mined this metadata the other day, is kind of my sweet spot that I like to shoot between 400 and 800 ISO. And so as you look at this, and as I look at this chart, and I've got it from the least amount I use, so sometimes 1% is shot at ISO 50, and then 20% of the pictures I've shot were at ISO 400. So if we say there's 20 plus 800 is 29, plus 8 more is 37, plus 8 more is 45, plus 5 more is 50, plus 4 more is 45, or 54, I'm sorry, 58. So 58% of the images I've ever shot in this catalog were shot between 400 and 800 ISO. So now when I tell people that's my sweet spot, I can definitely say that's my sweet spot. And you can see there, I try to limit how, I know there's all kinds of software programs now that you can use as far as noise reduction. Again, this is the old guy coming out in me, and this is just kind of my sensibilities because it was how I learned. But me, I really would rather get it right in the camera first, and getting it right to me shoots at the lowest ISO that your camera performs best at, finding that intersectionality point of performance and ISO where you're not giving up quality, and skipping the whole time I would necessarily spend post-processing. And so, but you can see there, so there's a 8% on 1,000, 3 more, so it's 11%, 14%, 15, so 16% of the pictures I've ever taken in that group were shot above 1,000 ISO. So again, it's not something I'm a fan of doing, because I definitely can see the difference in the way the pictures look. And two, let me just say that my sensibility, again, when I mentioned early on that this is more of a conceptual webinar instead of necessary, and is designed to get you to think about your own situation, not necessarily teach you hard lessons, but to let you know where my gear choice and my sensibilities come from. Since I shoot for a lot of commercial clients as well as editorial clients, I'm trying to deliver the cleanest image I can to them from the jump. And so for me to do that, it means I shoot at low ISOs. I've got to keep scrolling down to make sure you guys aren't sending in any more questions. So again, as always, if you have any questions as I go through this, just let me know. Here's one thing I really learned, and this was really eye-opening for me. The way I shoot, I'm a fan of using the exposure compensation on your camera. For me, I can just dial it in so much quicker than I can dial anything in manually. And so I use exposure compensation religiously. Now, the graph you're looking at here doesn't necessarily represent all 620,000 pictures. It only represents the pictures that use exposure compensation. But here's the takeaway from this I learned. And this is in just about every outdoor scenario. This is in just about every outdoor scenario you can think of. The one thing I learned, and this data tells me that, is you hardly ever have to do, the meters are good enough in these cameras, even though they still can be fooled. You never hardly have to do anything more than +1 or -1 on exposure compensation. And that data is pretty clear when you look at this. And so what that helps me with when I'm in the field, I'm not trying to think, how much exposure compensation should I dial in this? I know it's probably, chances are it's probably not going to be more than +1 or -1, because you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only 8% of the pictures that this thing analyzed were taken outside of the +1 or -1 stops of exposure range and exposure compensation. And so with most of them being a +1, and that means I had to add light. So what that's telling me is, as I look at this data, most of the pictures in that 29% where I use 1 stop of exposure compensation were all pictures taken like you see all the time in the outdoors with a, I had to, the picture's too bright, so I had to add light to the image, or +1. And so it tells me that there was a shadowy background of some sort, a darker background. And so by using this data, I mean, again, this part right here really opened my eyes to be able to look at that and be able to understand how the camera sees things and how the camera operates, and really take a lot of the ultimate thinking and deliberation out of my hand. Because as y'all know, when you're shooting, especially when you're shooting pictures of wildlife, things happen pretty quick, and I'd rather get the shot nailed as opposed to trying to fiddle with my camera for too long and miss the shot. But this right here has this one slide right here, I would almost argue, when I looked at all this metadata the other day, and I only did this a couple days ago, when I looked at all this, probably taught me more about how my cameras behave and operate and how I shoot with those cameras than any of these other slides did. So this was a really valuable piece of information for me that genuinely taught me something. That what it teaches me is, even though I can dial in ±3 stops of exposure compensation, I probably never even have to worry about that. So I can limit how far I can dial exposure compensation is, and just be able to arrive at proper exposure a lot quicker. Here's the thing that I presented this. I think I did a webinar back early in the year that was called the case for Aperture Priority, and why I think Aperture Priority is the absolute best way to go when you're shooting pictures in the outdoors. And I know manual mode's important, and I'm not saying that any of these modes are necessarily bad. What I am saying is Aperture Priority works best for me, because I can operate the camera so much more quickly in the field as opposed to me having to think about extra buttons in manual mode. And I can go through the whole thing of why I choose Aperture Priority, but the fact is I choose it a lot. And in fact, the last time I did this graph, Aperture Priority was only 80% of the pictures I took. Now it's grown by 1 percentage point. So to do the math again, if you figure 620,000 images, and we figure out how many pictures 81% is, that's 502,200 pictures that it was taken in Aperture Priority. So it's a lot of pictures. But again, it's a great mode, and that this one just kind of doubles down on what my assumptions are on how I shot. I knew I shot Aperture Priority a lot. Did I know it was 81%? Probably not. But the more surprising thing too is how I realized that I'm even a sucker for program mode every now and then. It's just 3% of the pictures. And I need to go back and look at that, because that's one of the things for further investigation I need to figure out. Is I kind of think the program mode may have been, so there's times when I will save my iPhone photos to my kind of so I've got my pictures in two places. I've got most of my DSLR pictures live in kind of one set of folders, and then all of my iPhone pictures live on iPhotos on the cloud. But there's a lot of times I'll copy some of those pictures over and that I want to keep in kind of my permanent professional archive, I should say. And in that professional archive, I'm just wondering if the program mode is that's where the 3% are coming over. I don't know where the 3% in program mode are coming from, because I absolutely I don't use that mode, but it's picking up that data from somewhere in some of the metadata, and I can't figure out where that is. But that's one of the things for further investigation I need to take a look at. And I kind of figured this one too was going to be the case. It's not is one of the things that surprised me when I started looking at the month taken on the pictures. It surprised me that they weren't more equally distributed. The one month I would have guessed correctly is January, because by the time January rolls around, I'm pretty tired, and for all the years I've taken pictures, I try to take a hiatus in January and just not shoot many pictures at all. And the reason for that is, one, I just too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. And number two, probably the least interesting month of the year in terms of places to take pictures around here. And since so much of my photography in the past has been dictated by me just shooting around where I live, that's why it's weighting January down. December really doesn't bother me. I mean, it really doesn't surprise me at all. The next big surprise is October. I really thought there'd be more pictures taken in October, because the elk are in rut, the white-tailed deer are in hard antlers, and they're starting to get a little frisky, and the fall woods are just a beautiful place to be. And so it surprises me that October is only 7%. It also surprises me too that April is 7%, because of my self-professed love for wild turkeys. I always thought that I would probably take more pictures in April than what's actually graphically showing up. But again, if you go back and you start segmenting the data, and I just look at my wild turkey pictures, that's going to look completely different. And so it's since you analyze all the data, since for this presentation I analyzed all the data together, that's just how it shows up. And so that's another good lesson you can think about, is if you want to start going back and analyzing when you start going back and analyzing the metadata on all your pictures, you start seeing trends like this. But again, you can go and start kind of segmenting that data into smaller sets and taking a more critical and analytical look at it. Linda asked the question, will you show us where the AV or TV priority data shows up in your Lightroom? I don't remember seeing it when you showed us on the metadata screen. That's a good question, Linda. I'm going to have to go back and take a look at that. So in the end, if you'll follow up with me on, I'll provide my email address, send me an email, and I'll look up that. It wasn't on that screen that I showed you, but I don't know if it's if that's something you can turn on or off. So I'll have to take a look at that and kind of figure that out a little more. That the metadata view you saw is kind of right out of the box. I never have changed that on what you can see, but maybe you can, or if anyone else knows if you can or not, feel free to chime in and let us know. But anyway, the short answer is I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that. But I know all that data is recorded within the pictures. Back on metadata too, when I'm talking image management stuff, that's why I don't recommend if people are trying to come up with a good organizational scheme for their photos. I know a lot of people will take them, will organize them by the date that they were taken. But to me, that's always been redundant because all that information is preserved in the metadata, and you can always use Lightroom to search it later. And so I advocate for a different way of organizing photos. And then the day taken. So this part kind of embarrasses me a little bit, the day taken. So if you look at it, most of the pictures I've taken are on Saturday of all this group. And it embarrasses me because I've been doing I've been doing full-time professional photography since 2009, and I never really thought myself as being a weekend warrior, but that's exactly what I turned out to be. 30% of the pictures I've taken were taken on Saturday or Sunday. Doesn't surprise me that Sunday is probably the smallest number, and it doesn't surprise me that Friday is the smallest number. I think over time, what you're going to see are these midweek days starting to grow more, middle of the week days starting to grow more, because even though I'm self-employed and I make my living with the camera, really I try to dictate all of my work, or as much of the work as I can. I should say it that way. I try to dictate as much of the work as I can, like a regular work week, and try to take weekends off and use family time. I'd be willing to bet the Saturday pictures and Sunday pictures were pictures I've just taken around the farm or somewhere like that when when I just go out in the morning and take pictures for an hour or two and then come back in and spend the rest of the time with the family, because I do a lot of that. So because one of the things about photography is I love doing it so much is I not only do it for a living, but also do it for a hobby as well. And so I go take pictures of stuff when I have no thought that I might even recoup a penny off of it. I still just like going out and taking pictures. Like, how many more pictures of hummingbirds does the world need? But I spent probably 2 hours yesterday doing nothing but taking hummingbird pictures, because first time I'd ever done it yesterday was taking hummingbird. It was take hummingbird pictures, and I had a blast doing it and a blast trying to figure out the best way to go on that. So, but anyway, so the day taken shows me that information as well. Now, here's another big eye opener. We'll spend a little bit of time on this. I kind of suspected this, but when I see it really show up like it does, it's pretty eye opening, particularly when so many of those pictures I've taken in this group that were analyzed were not necessarily of wildlife, but also commercial shoots where you're shooting all day long and you don't really worry about the angle of the sun because you use scrims and use artificial lighting and all kinds of other techniques. But when you analyze 620,000 pictures together, here's the two takeaways I have. I guess universally 2 a.m. in the morning, I don't take pictures, but look what happens when you get to 6 a.m. It starts to peak. So 7, 8, 9, and 10 o'clock, and then 4, 5, 6, and 7 o'clock. For me, those are the two sweet spots of the day. If I can do the quick math, 18 plus 14 is 42. Is that right? I think that's right. 18 plus 14 is 42. No, 32. I'm sorry. 32, and then 19, 27, 34, 32, and 34 are 66%. So 66% of the pictures I've taken are within a 8-hour span of the day. So 66% of the pictures, another way to look at it, 66% of the pictures I've taken were taken in 1 quarter, 25% of the entire day. And so, which goes to show you what the old photography masters told you, the middle of the day is the flattest light and it's not the best time to take pictures. So 11, 12, 1, 2, 3 o'clock are not overly represented. But when I looked at it this way and I saw this graph and the way it showed up, it really, really did surprise me. And when I took a look at this, and kind of doubles down on what I thought, really mornings and evenings are the the best time to take pictures, especially not only for the light, but also for typically animal movement. And this may be a little bit hard to see. So this is a breakdown of all the lenses I use. The takeaway here is I've got access to a lot of lenses, even a tilt shift lens. You can see at the very top in the dark red, I used it to take 1% of the pictures, but it kind of doubles down on the graph we saw earlier where I live my life in telephoto. So 8 plus 24 is 32, plus 30 is 62, plus 11 is 73%. 73% of the pictures I took in this group, I've taken in this group, were all shot on some sort of telephoto lens. From 70 to 200 millimeter, 85 millimeter, 500 millimeter, or a 300 millimeter f2.8. As I look at this, the one thing that surprised me the most is my 300 2.8. It's a great lens, but I rarely use it. I hardly ever pick that thing up, and so I don't know where all those pictures are coming from. And so that's another source of data that would be interesting to see and kind of where those group into. But again, it's data that you can go back and mine. And so the whole point here is understanding how you shoot pictures and understanding points of weakness or opportunity that you can manifest and make yourself a better photographer just by studying your own photo trends. And this one doesn't surprise me either. Because of my propensity to shoot in telephoto and aperture priority, one of the key reasons I like shooting in aperture priority goes back to sort of how I learned how to take pictures. When I was a young photographer, one of the things that always enamored me was you'd look at Sports Illustrated magazines like back in the 80s and see pictures of Nolan Ryan or pictures of Dwight Gooden or any of the great baseball or football players back in the day, Herschel Walker and Bo Jackson and some of those guys, where they would be perfectly in focus, but the background behind them would be completely out of focus. And so when I started seeing those pictures in like Sports Illustrated magazine back in the 80s when I was learning photography, or when I first began learning photography, because I think you're always learning photography. That's the whole point of this webinar I'm doing now. I've learned a lot just by looking at how I shoot. One thing I noticed about those pictures back in the 80s was how sharp, like Herschel Walker was, but how out of focus the background was. So that's one of the first techniques I wanted to learn to master and teach myself. So that's one of the reasons I started shooting aperture priority, because I could set the aperture and the camera would make the decision on the shutter speed. And then, or I would set the aperture and the ISO and the camera would make decisions on the shutter speed. And that just gave me one less thing to think about as I was out taking pictures. And as you can see here, because I like big glass and big wide open lenses, if I can do the quick math, let's see, there's 5, 29 is 34, plus 7 more is 41, plus 8 is 49, 5 more is 54, 16 more of that, 70, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 80% of the pictures I've taken in this whole group were taken at f6.3 and lower. And so, again, I like really smooth backgrounds, really out of focus backgrounds. And I like shooting these lenses really, really wide open. Now, did I think it was going to be 80%? I had no idea about that, but still, it's pretty eye-opening when you can kind of see it in graphical form, and really helps you understand how you shoot and how you go about acquiring the images that you go about acquiring. And I think that's all the data, but there's a couple more points I want to make as I take this. I shot that picture back in on the Kenai trip back in August when I went to Alaska, and I like this shot because it's like that seagull is the bald eagle's wingman in this shot. Okay, so here's your action items right here, ways you can use metadata. And then when we're done here, I'll open it up if anyone else has any more questions on this. One of the things you can do, and I've started doing it more since I acquired that software program, or analyze groups of photos and look for patterns. And again, just trying to get insight, just trying to get insights on how I kind of approach it as a shooter. And once you do that, you can start poking holes in the way you do as a shooter. Like me, I just realized I've got lenses, thousands of dollars worth of lenses. I don't use that much. I need to use them more if I'm going to have them. If I'm not going to use them much, I just need to get rid of them. But by analyzing groups of photos and look for those patterns, you can uncover things like that. And this is what I do. I've been doing this ever since digital came out. I keep notes from individual photos and how I made them, and I'll make field notes. And originally, I would make me just little books that I would print myself that I could kind of keep in my pack. So in other words, if I want to go out and shoot night photos with the moonlight as the primary light source, instead of having to think back and trial by error, I could just look through my little scenario pages and see, okay, here's what I did on these pictures. So this situation works, and so I can make me a field guide to that kind of picture. Or before I got it ingrained in my mind, a shot like this of this pronghorn, where you've got a really dark background and the middle tone subject against a dark background, I'd make myself notes on this is how you achieve this picture. And so the metadata in your photo is invaluable for doing that. And now we've got the ability to keep it all. You can make your own PDF and keep it on your phone, or you can put it in the notes apps that's on iPhone, or I don't know the equivalent app that the Samsung phones use, but there's all kinds of ways of keeping notes, and that way it makes it easy, handy pocket field guide for you to refer back to when you're going out and taking pictures. And you can do all that from looking back at the metadata on pictures you took. So it's a good way to uncover what's been successful for you and what has been less than successful for you. And then you can also do segment photos into groups and do parallel assessments. So in other words, like I talked about turkey earlier, I could actually take a look at I can analyze the data by looking at the turkeys pictures, the time of the year I took them, and the time of day I took them, and do parallel analyses and see if there's a pattern based on when's the most good chance I'm going to take pictures of turkeys, not only just about being turkeys, but if you can look even deeper, when's the most logical time I can take pictures of turkeys gobbling? What's that sweet spot? So it helps you look for patterns within the data to help figure out, when's the best time to be out there. You can do it with your photos. I do a lot of that same kind of analysis with, I'll put out game cameras and just let those game cameras take pictures when I'm not there. And you go back and analyze the data, and you can kind of figure out when's sort of the sweet spot. And those sweet spots, for example, for white-tailed deer, aren't necessarily universal. They may wane throughout the week or throughout the month. And so by looking at that data over time, you can start trying to figure out how animals move, when you're having your best luck, and start looking for holes in your technique and in your process that will help you ultimately become a better photographer. I'm a big fan in photography. I'm a big fan of, especially nature photography, of controlling all the variables you can control to the point that you can't control them anymore. And typically the point you can't control is, are the animals going to show up, or the skies on the landscape shot going to be interesting? And so, but if you can control all the variables up to that point, you really stack the odds in your favor that you can come away with some memorable images. Jeff asked the question, will the programs also look at keywords as well? They will not. I wish they could, because that would be interesting to do some cross analyses like that, Jeff. But as far as this Photostatistica, what I used for looking at all the data that we saw, it'll only do just the hard metadata that your camera captures each time. Now, if you mean, there are some cross-reference ways you can look at metadata using keywords in Lightroom, and I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but I just need to be a little more specific on kind of what you're trying to do. So with that, is there any questions? Anything anybody wants to go back and look at anymore on the metadata? I know this is kind of a little bit of a different sort of webinar today, but I do think it's important that if you're so analytically inclined to be able to kind of go back and look at how you make your own pictures and just learn from that data. It's all there. It's all free. It's easy to organize, and it's pretty easy to understand. It's not like you have to have a PhD in statistics to be able to understand what it's trying to tell you, but it's it's pretty powerful in any regard to be able to go back and look at it. And look, it's not something I go back and look at every day. That's kind of a rainy day situation I do. 2 or 3 times a year, I may just take a look at it, and I may not take a look at all of it. I may take a look at a certain thing, like I may just take a look at a certain thing, like, you know, time of day on a specific animal. But it's not necessarily I look at it all globally all the time. But the global part was just to kind of look at it with you guys, and you just let you see a little bit of insight on sort of how I look at my approach and how I think about photography and how I look at just trying to learn more and more every day. I mean, you know, if you've been on these webinars very much, you know that I equate photography to golf, and it's, you know, it's an activity that you'll never master. But I think the beauty of it all is in the pursuit of trying to be better at it and using all the tools at our disposal to make ourselves better at it. And I don't see any other questions coming in, but while I'm waiting on questions coming in, when this is over, if you think of any more things that you want to ask, or who was it? Linda asked a specific question about Lightroom. If you have any other questions long after this is gone, you can ask anybody. I always return emails, so just feel free to reach out and send me an email if you have any specific questions about anything, or tell me what you're figuring out. You know, I always love to hear stories on after I do a webinar of how people have kind of, you know, a light bulb has went off in their head in terms of how they looked at their photography different and how they think about things different. So if you have any other questions or comments after this webinar is over, feel free to reach out to me and let me know how things are going. In the meantime, I'll wait a couple more minutes to see if any other questions are coming in. I don't see any. And I'll just tell you that looking forward to seeing some of you guys again down the road, and meeting some of the people that I haven't met before. And it's always fun to get to see the names on here, then finally get to meet people in person. In fact, on the Katmai trip, I'd walked into the hotel we were staying at in King Salmon, and I was talking to the lady at the front desk trying to get our rooms situated, and one of the people on the guest said, "You're Russell," because I recognize your voice from the webinars. And so it was good to meet her and good to spend time with her on the trips. Okay, we got a couple of questions coming in. Leslie asked, "I'm afraid I missed the first 10 minutes. Is it the software you mentioned, Photostatistics, that you get the data? Is it an app, or how to use it?" It's a standalone software program that lives on my computer. Let me go back. I know there's a little bit of lag time. I'm going to go all the way back to the front here so I can show the name of it. There we go. It's Photostatistica, Leslie. That's the name of it. So I think it's Bristol-based software, but if you do a search for Photostatistica, that'll come up. I think I just saw it pop up on the App Store one time. I'd never used it before, but it's pretty, you know, it's a lot of fun to look at this stuff. And again, that's for the Mac. I'm not sure what the equivalent for the PC is, but I know someone out there has made it somewhere. And then Mary said, "Great webinar. Thank you." I appreciate that, Mary. And thanks again, Brad. And then Dave asked, "Are you going to Bosque this year?" Yes, sir. I am going to Bosque this year, and looking forward to that trip. We didn't get to go last year. I think it's been a couple of years since we've gotten to go there, so I'm looking forward to going on that trip again, because that's such a wonderful place. I'm a little bit biased to that trip too, because that's one of the trips that I pioneered. They didn't do Bosque before I came around, and so it's one I'm looking forward to, because there's just a lot of wildlife there and a lot of good opportunities. Not only the wildlife, but also White Sands is a pretty neat place to go to for landscape photography. Julie says, "Oh, thanks, Julie." She just said she enjoyed the presentation and look forward to meeting up again on another Backcountry Journeys trip. We stayed safe on that Katmai trip because Julie kept everybody, including the bears, in line on that trip. So if you ever need someone to keep everybody in line on a trip, just get Julie to help you out. I know she kept us in line. It was a great trip, a lot of fun. Couldn't ask for a better group of guests. I was still getting emails on a day-to-day basis about that trip and how much of a good time we had. So again, I look forward to meeting everybody. If we don't have any other questions, I'll oh, we got more. I just didn't scroll down. Jeff's going to be tells me he's going to be in Bosque in November. And then thank you, Mary, for the comment there. So I'm going to try to scroll down one more time. If we don't have any further questions, I'm going to sign off for the day. And again, tell everyone thanks for being here and thanks for listening in, and stay in touch, and I'll talk to everyone again soon. Oops. James has a thought real fast. Got in at the last minute. I'm just going to read this verbatim, James. He says, some thoughts about the picture taken with program mode. The pie chart about the camera body shows no iPhone. Well, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. While it shows the Olympus with 2% of the pictures. So I doubt if the pictures in program mode were taken for that. Yeah, I didn't think about that, James. That is a good point. That I'm going to go back and reference what James was talking about. So if we look at the exposure mode used, 3% of the pictures I've taken, which are not an insignificant amount. And again, that's one of the things I've got to figure out. So 620,000, 3% of that is hang on, I can't see if you can see it or not, is 18,600 pictures. And so 3% of that whole group were taken in program mode. And again, I don't know where they're coming from. But what I think the point James is making, if you go back and look at the cameras I used, I guess it shows up in a mixture of all of those. I don't know why it shows up that way. But again, that's part of the mystery that makes this whole game so exciting, and one of the things we'd have to go back and look at. So I'm glad you picked up on that, James. That's always one of the neat things about these webinars is there are no sacred cows necessarily. That everything is subject to interpretation, and that interpretation can sometimes be skewed, just like mine was there. So I appreciate you bringing that up, James. I really do. I'll go back here to the my last, that one right there. So yeah, stay in touch. Russell at russellgraves.com. I don't see any other questions coming through, so I will talk to you guys soon, and take care, everyone.